People very often ask me both how and why I started my podcasting journey. Well, as an engineer, I'm frankly very passionate about math. I wanted to find somewhere to share stories of great mathematicians from Archimedes to Alan Turing and everyone in between. And for that reason, I want to tell you a little bit about my preferred hosting platform, which is Zencaster. Now, before I continue, this is usually the conversation I have with anybody who is wanting to start their own podcast. I know there are so many people out there with passions that they want to share with the world or unique knowledge that they're just looking for a platform to start with. And Zencaster is a wonderful all-in-one platform. What I mean by that is you can do your recording and your editing and use AI to create a transcript and distribute to all platforms, including Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere else where podcasts are played. For anybody like me who might worry at first about what you might sound like on an audio recording, Zencaster's post-production process makes you sound really, really smooth. It automatically removes any of the ums or ahs in your recording. It removes any of the awkward pauses in conversations, and it also helps you to set the right podcast loudness and levels while reducing any background noise, all with the click of a button. It couldn't be easier. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code BREAKINGMATH, and you'll get 30% off your first month in any Zencaster paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. Fairly often, I get asked questions about how I got started podcasting with the Breaking Math podcast, and I'll often be asked this question by those who are thinking of starting their own podcast. That is, people who are looking to tell a story or share their unique wisdom with a larger audience or their passions, or maybe just advertise their business or services. I usually like to start this conversation by either showing off or telling about our preferred podcasting platform, Zencaster. Zencaster is essentially an all-in-one podcast hosting platform. On this platform, you can do everything from recording your episodes to editing your audio and video files to distributing your podcast to all podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and wherever else podcasts are played. Now, there's more. When I first began podcasting, I used to get very nervous about how I would sound. I would sometimes stutter or have awkward pauses or other audio blemishes in my recordings. Now, Zencaster has a new suite of AI tools in their post-production process that make you sound really smooth. They automatically take out any of the ums or ahs in your recording. Also, they automatically take out any of the awkward pauses in your discussions. The tools will also help you set the right loudness and balance all the levels while reducing any background noise, all with the click of a button. Doesn't sound too bad, does it? You really should check it out. Really, the world needs to hear what you have to say. In fact, I'm going to give you a code below to help give you a large discount. It's all one word, Breaking Math. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code BREAKINGMATH, and you'll get 30% off of your first month in any Zencaster paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience I do for all my podcasting content needs. It's time to share your...
In the United States, the 4th of July is celebrated as a national holiday, where the focus of that holiday is the war that had the end effect of ending England's colonial influence over the American colonies. To that end, we are here to talk about war and how it has been influenced by mathematicians and mathematics. The brutality of war and the ingenuity of war seem to stand at stark odds to one another, as one begets temporary chaos, and the other represents lasting accomplishment in the sciences. Leonardo da Vinci, one of the greatest Western minds, thought war was an illness, but worked on war machines. Feynman and Von Neumann had similar views, as had many over time, as part of being human is being intrigued and disgusted by war, which is something we have to be aware of as a species. So what is warfare? What have we learned from refining its practice? And why do we find it necessary? All of this and more on this episode of Breaking Math. Episode 29, War. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And today we have on Carlo, a friend of Gabriel's who has a special interest in military history. Carlo?
Hey, how you guys doing?
We're doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing well. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank you for coming on this episode. It's great having somebody with an interest in military history who can advise us and talk about this. It's a challenge to always apply mathematics to the humanities, but this is one of our efforts. And obviously, war is a horrible part of humanity, but it's an ever-present part as you open up a history book. And there's a lot to say about war and engineering and mathematics. So I think this will be a very interesting episode.
Absolutely, and I'll also say that something that has been theorized throughout the ages is that the most humane form of war is the war that is most effective and completed most quickly.
Yeah.
And so the more technological advancement you have, the more that allows you to prosecute war quickly and effectively, and perhaps bring it to an end sooner.
Interesting way of looking at it. My brother is very, very much a theologian. He has a huge interest in Catholic theology and philosophy as a whole, and he actually talks about a just war doctrine. So it'd be interesting to find out from him, maybe at a later date, more specifically, how that applies.
Now, one thing that's interesting about war is that a lot of stuff that's going on in the news has brought discussions on the rules of war, and there's sort of a continuum that you could kind of see that relates, I think, a little bit, just as an example of the kind of thing we're going to be talking about on this episode, to information theory, where at the one side of the continuum you have arguments, something that you might have every day with somebody, and then you get into things like lawsuits, legal battles, and then you have war, and then past war you have atrocities. It's interesting that it's all about how far you slide on the scale is how much conflict that you're in. The mathematics of conflict are fascinating. We're going to go a little bit more into that, but as a little bit of a preview, we're going to just talk real quick about how Aztecs warfare was in certain places, especially within different tribes that were related to one another. They would just play a deathly ball game where they would execute the losers and give all the clothing and jewelry of the attendants from one to the other. So that's a less extreme version, but it still involves human death.
Wow, that's wild. So presumably Aztecs had the same problems with conflict that we have this day and age, and presumably there was a time before this game developed, but somehow their societal rules and what they're willing to do evolved into this game that's almost like Hunger Games in a way.
Yeah, the same thing happened in parts of Europe in the late 18th century, where they called it gentlemanly warfare between like little kings and princes and things like that. It was all bloody.
Yeah, I actually read a paper when I was in college. I took an anthropology class, and there was a paper I read about a tribe in, I believe it was New Guinea. You know what? I'm going to have to cite that. I'm going to have to find out where it was. It was definitely near Australia. There's a tribe where they do have war with other tribes. Interestingly enough, when they go to war, the minute there is a single fatality, the war ends. The battle ends. Somebody calls out the name of whoever was fallen, and the battle ends for that day. Both tribes then stop and clean up, and they leave. And then the tribe that lost a member then plots a form of revenge against the attacking or the other tribe, and it kind of goes on forever, kind of like how West Side Story or how gangs do. I just found it interesting that they can have a war where it's not just complete annihilation; it actually ends with a single death. That's still tragic, and that of course it's tragic, but it's I don't know. I found it interesting to juxtapose against other battles where it's almost total annihilation.
And Carlo, what do you know about the Geneva Convention?
The Geneva Convention, along with a variety of other, let's say, guidelines, plays a significant role in shaping, what is considered acceptable in warfare. So you have the law of armed conflict, for example, which guides rules of engagement, things of that nature, for various entities when they're engaged in war. So, there's a, lengthy ethical discussion that can be had about, the balance that needs to be maintained between effectively prosecuting a target and doing so in a way that's ethical and humane.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about the complexity of war, but that sort of that sort of is where we're coming from, looking at war as a symptom, really, of at least at the current point in time of being human. If war is something that we have to study to understand ourselves, then perhaps studying how we study it is also very important. And with that, we're going to talk about a little bit about Abraham Wald and the mathematics of bullet holes in airplanes during World War II.
Yeah, Abraham Wald, he was a gentleman born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1902. He was of Jewish descent, and as was the case with so many people of Jewish descent, in the build-up to World War II, he was forced to flee Europe in response to Nazi Germany's growth and the threat they posed to people of Jewish descent. So he comes to the United States, and he's a mathematician by training, and he gets heavily involved in statistics. So during World War II, the United States, as part of the war effort, they had various groups that were working to help with the war effort, and one of them was statistically based. It was kind of like a Manhattan Project, if you will, for statistics. And
these were war statistics or just general statistics?
Well, they would look at a variety of problems, but they were all tied to the general war effort. So there's a multiplicity of different topics they would address. So
got it.
The Army was concerned about the number of aircraft being shot down over Europe on bombing raids. So they basically presented this statistical group with the question of what do we do to protect these aircraft that are getting shot down? And one of the things they looked at was putting armor on the aircraft. Now, the challenge with putting armor on the aircraft is that it weighs a lot. So, you have the advantage of protecting the aircraft, but you have the disadvantage of consuming more fuel due to the added weight from the armor.
So you want somewhere between a balloon and a brick.
Yeah, essentially. You want to find that optimum level where you have just enough armor to protect the aircraft, get the aircraft home safely, but not use any more gas than you need to. Because the more gas you use, that decreases your range, because they didn't have mid-air refueling back then. So that decreases the range, it decreases the number of targets you can hit, so on and so forth. So, in essence, they're looking for that optimum amount of armor to put on the aircraft. Now, one of the things they looked at to determine what the optimum level is where were the bullet holes on these aircraft? So if you're going to put armor on the aircraft, you want to put it in the places that are getting hit. So the Army provided the statistical data to this group of where the bullet holes were on the aircraft that were making it back from these bombing raids. The engines were a little over 1 bullet hole per square foot. The fuselage was approximately 1.75 bullet holes per square foot. The fuel system was about 1.5. The rest of the plane was about 1.8 bullet holes per square foot. So, the logical intuition is, okay, you're getting the most bullets per square feet in the fuselage and the rest of the plane.
And so I guess you rule the rest of the plane out because it's too much, right? But
yeah, exactly. So if you have a limited amount of armor you can put on there, the logical intuition is let's put the armor where we're getting the most bullet holes. And that way we protect the crew, we get the plane home safely, we use a limited amount of armor to get there. Well, Abraham Wald had a totally different approach to this. His intuition was the exact opposite. His intuition was, okay, the lowest number of bullet holes are in the engine. And what he's thinking is the reason all the aircraft that made it back safely had large numbers of bullet holes elsewhere and very low numbers of bullet holes in the engine were because the aircraft that got hit a lot in the engine, they all went down. And so his intuition was telling him, we need to put the armor around the engines because all the aircraft that are getting hit in the engines didn't make it back. And so this brings up this notion of there's a concept when you're analyzing statistics.
Sampling bias, right?
Right. They referred to it, in reference to this problem as a survivability bias, right? And so the idea is when you're looking at statistics, there's a natural assumption that you have a valid sample set that you're looking at, right? And if you're only taking into account let's say for the purposes of this example, you're only taking into account the aircraft that make it back, your sample set is skewed. You don't have a full sample set. The full sample set would include the aircraft that didn't make it back.
Yeah, so you get so you take the minimum number of bullet holes per square foot, and since it's on something so critical, it's with what you should protect.
Exactly. So his assumption was that if you just protect those engines, that's where you're going to get the most payoff. And so they went ahead and went with that approach, and as it turns out, It saved many, many lives, many aircraft, and it ended up being the approach that was used by the Air Force not only in World War II, but they armored engines during the Korean War and the Vietnam War as well.
Yeah, it's a really interesting lesson, because I know that like the number of statistics we use in war has gone up just the amount of statistics used everywhere has gone up every year since we invented statistics, pretty much. And I know that another time this has been used, we're going to talk about near the end of this episode, about statistics in World War II, but this is a very interesting example of where engineering has been improved by this incredible amount of stress testing. You have bullets, basically, that you're stress testing against.
One of the things that I did want to talk about real briefly is the survivor bias. I think a common example that we often hear about or maybe read about online is whenever somebody says, "Oh, I experienced X when I was younger, and I lived and I was fine, so there's no problem with it." Well, that's a perfect example of where if you experienced it and you're here, and you live to tell the tale, what about all those people who experienced whatever it is? I don't know what we want to say. What's a good example here?
I don't know, mercury, playing around with mercury. I don't know.
Yeah, lead poisoning in water, what have you. Yeah, I mean, any number of things. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, and then say, and I turned out fine, so it must be okay. So that's a perfect example of survivor bias. And what's interesting is I think that's something that I would have even fallen for, or I would have thought, well, gee, that's compelling, where in fact it's not compelling, but you need to understand that sort of bias.
A wonderful book, if you want to know more about biases and how they're used actually by advertisers, is How to Lie with Statistics. It's a book written in the 50s, and I would have to look up the writer, but you have Google.
An entire episode on manipulation would be fabulous, I think. I'd love that as a topic.
Absolutely.
It's just this simple notion that, if you assume that data can steer you in the right direction, and I'm certainly inclined, I'm a large advocate of science and data and where it guides you, but the assumption intrinsic in using data to guide your decision making is that the data you have is valid. So if it's bad data in, the output's going to be bad as well.
So the next thing we're going to talk about is how mathematics can kind of improve itself, really. How mathematics can improve the process of doing logical decisions so it's quicker.
Right. So something that's come up quite a bit recently in, the development of different tools for military purposes is the idea of decision superiority. So it's kind of similar to air superiority, but the idea is that, technology has reduced the timeline through which decisions are made increasingly over time. And so
now, what kind of decisions need to be made?
So a good example would be, let's say you have a target on the ground that, say it's a anti-aircraft missile battery, and it turns on its radar quickly, and then it turns it back off, right? So you're going to need to quickly determine which asset is going to be used to hit that target, properly locate the target, and then get munitions down on that target in short order, right?
So supplying decisions, things like that?
Yeah. Or, for example, so there's this, in the military, there's, something referred to as ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, right? And so ISR produces information to decision makers, and then decision makers need to quickly make decisions based on that information to prosecute the war. And, enemy countries are going to be doing the same thing. And so logic dictates that you might gain an advantage from having better ISR assets, for example, but you also could gain an advantage from having the ability to make decisions based on what the ISR assets tell you quicker, right?
Yeah, so it seems like it's both about computational speed and the speed at which you can relay and gather relevant data.
That's correct. How quickly can you get the data? Once you have the data, how quickly can you make relevant decisions based upon it?
And so are a lot of these decisions made currently by humans with busy schedules? That's the problem?
Well, so you have people making decisions, leadership making decisions based on, the data in front of them, but their adversaries will be making those decisions too. And, the one who makes the decision first gains a certain advantage. So right now, those decisions are made, as you said, by people. And so in the future, it's postulated that, there will be a distinct advantage that comes from introducing artificial intelligence into the decision-making process and getting to the point where artificial intelligence can recognize data as it comes in, process it, and make the appropriate decision in a much quicker timeline than a person could make that same decision. And so that gives you a distinct advantage over your adversary.
I'm reminded a little bit of there are certain traps in when you're trying to trap animals where you dig a hole that looks like a hole that was dug by another creature, and I don't exactly know how these traps work, but it ends up trapping the animal. And I could see an adversary seeing somebody who uses this AI and then developing another AI to sort of trap them in a web of decisions and trying to confuse the other person as much as possible by doing bizarre things that take a lot of energy.
I've got a very strange little analogy here, or not. I'm sorry, not an analogy, but I'm
Summer concerts, pool parties, chill nights under the stars. We're stocking up our closet so you're ready to look your best for all of it. At Plato's Closet in West Ashley and North Charleston, we're buying all things summer. So bring in your tees, tote bags, sandals, sunglasses, and more. We pay cash on the spot for gently loved name brand looks. Plato's Closet is the go-to destination for trend-forward teens and young adults who support local and shop sustainable. Visit Plato's Closet today. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
reminded of the 1980s movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, Predator. Did you all ever see Predator?
I did.
No.
Okay. Well, Predator has what is it, like an infrared?
Yeah.
Like
he
heat
sees an
sensing,
infrared.
and Arnold just tricks it by jumping into cold mud, which makes him sort of invisible for the time being. So that's actually a very interesting point, because as soon as you have new rules or a new means of getting information, then obviously it raises the question of how do you trick that that AI. One thing that I wanted to bring up is. Machine learning is a fascinating topic for me, in part because I don't understand it. And I know that in terms of neural networks, there's a lot of folks who don't understand it.
And you did some machine learning when you did your project.
Exactly. Yeah. My evolutionary algorithm. By the way, I'm going to say this here on the podcast. I want to make that algorithm or a version of it available for the public on GitHub, because I'd love to get some input from our listeners. I'd love for them to take it and run with it, because it's a cool project.
And we're going to do that. Go to github.com/breakingmathpodcast.
Awesome. Yay.
That's the thing I have to do now.
Now, the reason why I wanted to bring up machine learning, because I hope I say this with I tread lightly when I say this, but I want to be appropriately skeptical. I know that I have a brother-in-law who's very interested in machine learning, and he works for the government doing something. I'm not actually privy to what, but he talks about how there has been there's some versions of machine learning that essentially are just a complex lookup table. I mean, is artificial intelligence and a neural network more than just a lookup table?
Well, interestingly, I think what artificial intelligence is today will in no way reflect what it will be in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So what artificial intelligence is capable of doing today is probably going to be quite a bit different from what we use it for 2 or 3 decades down the road.
Just to give you an example, within the last 2 years, massive improvements to artificial neural networks have been made by giving them the concept of focus. Giving them a little bit of a memory to say, write down whatever you want here, but remember what you wrote down, and they work better. Just tiny little improvements like that are incremental have made almost revolutionary advancements. So I see where you're coming from.
Fascinating. That's fascinating.
I don't know if you guys are, I've read a bit recently about AI, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Turing test.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of the...
for those who aren't aware, the Turing test is a test but it's testing a computer with a program on it. The program is trying to simulate a human intelligence, and the computer is said to pass the Turing test if a human talks to it and generally thinks that it's another human.
Right. And so I've read from a wide range of experts in the field folks at the AI lab out at MIT, various other folks, to kind of, because I've always been kind of fascinated with where AI is at and how it's progressing. And what I've seemed to find is that a lot of experts in the field believe that AI will be able to pass the Turing test by approximately 2030. And then you could reach, this prediction, varies, but I've read from a lot of prominent people in the field that you could see the singularity happen as early as like 2045. And so, I mean, when you think about that, we're approximately a quarter century away from AI being vastly superior to human beings in terms of its capacity for thinking, so on and so forth. So
hopefully empathy.
Yeah, well, hopefully, right? And so, what AI will be capable of doing with respect to warfare in 25 years, I think, is going to be very advanced.
I was just going to say, I can almost see AI getting so advanced that it prevents wars. But that's what people thought about the internet, so.
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll see. It seems like, war is, whenever you have human beings involved, as long as, conflict resolution is not our strong suit. Something that a lot of people have talked about with reference to AI and warfare that's a little concerning is the notion of autonomous weapons.
This episode is all about how mathematics has been used by humankind in developing national defense strategies. One of the topics we discuss is modern and future areas of research that many nations are interested in, especially for national defense. These include, among others, artificial intelligence and machine learning. To that end, our partner, Brilliant.org, has a course all about artificial neural networks and how they can be used to emulate the type of learning and strategizing that occurs in the human brain. I love how the course takes you through the main categories of machine learning, including the universal approximation theorem, regression, and unsupervised learning. Machine learning is at the cutting edge of research in many industries, including defense, and this course provides a solid foundation in the essentials of this field. To support your education in math and physics, go to www.brilliant.org/breakingmath and sign up for free. The first 200 Breaking Math listeners can get 20% off the annual subscription, which we have been using. And now, back to the episode.
And, that's something that I think as AI continues to develop, that's something we could see in the future. And so the idea would be that you have weapon systems that not only are capable of, functioning on their own, but the decision-making apparatus is entirely carried out by the AI as well. So there's no human in the loop whatsoever. So, yeah, as you can imagine, that would lead to a really heightened level of efficiency and probably reduced error making. But do you want machines making decisions on which targets you strike, so on and so forth?
Yeah. Well, the human still in the loop is the one who gave the orders, right?
Well, so the idea would be that you would eventually get to the point where the AI is completely autonomous. They're out there operating on their own.
So where's the human link? Congress?
I mean, you in essence, the human link would be you give the AI instructions and then you let it go.
Oh, yeah. I'm just thinking who gives the last human instruction?
I would imagine, I mean, this is just speculation, but I would imagine if these are used in warfare, that last instruction would be given by some part of the military apparatus. But, I mean, this is purely speculative on my part.
And with the last instruction, they had no idea what they had done.
I know. That definitely sounds like the opening to a Terminator with Skynet. That really does. And I guess the reason why I brought up what I brought up earlier is I was thinking in essence. So Jonathan, I hope you don't mind me saying, you have a brand new, gorgeous computer with a very high definition monitor, right?
Yes.
So you can have a beautiful picture that looks almost exactly like I'm staring out a window. It's so good. Now, if I zoom in and zoom in and zoom in, ultimately it's still pixels. And the reason why I bring up this comment that I just did is I'm a little skeptical of AI or true artificial intelligence, because one thing that I learned in all of my classes in computer engineering is that computers are dumb. They just do what you tell them to do. And that's why I brought up the comment earlier about a lookup table. Like, ultimately what it boils down to is a set of algorithms and a lookup table. Yes, it gets more advanced, and yes, you have more if loops but it's still dumb. And this was more, the philosophical question, which relates to the Turing test of, even if you have a super, advanced computer or AI that still, it has, to the nth degree of lookup tables and if loops and that sort of thing, is it still a dumb computer? Or
Well, I think that you're running into a paradox similar to the Greek paradox of the notion of a group of things, like a pile of rocks. The paradox, I think we've heard it on here before, says that if you have a pile of rock and you take away one rock, it's still a pile. But if you do that enough times, you get one rock. So one rock is equal to a pile of rocks, which is a paradox because obviously it isn't.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I kind of feel like it's the same way with this, where you might start with if loops, but if you add more and more, there is a point where you have to look outside the system and see what you wrought.
Yeah.
And, not to mention, if you assume, it depends on how you're defining the singularity, but if you get to the point where AI are vastly superior intellectually to the human brain,
Yep.
I mean, couldn't you get to the point where, we're defining the way this computer functions right now in the way you just described,
Yep.
but isn't it possible that AI could advance quite a bit beyond that limited capacity?
And I guess to answer that question, one other way, this is actually a little disconcerting, a little uncomfortable way of looking at it is, you and I, us three here, are we not already just making decisions based on inputs? Aren't we
Sure.
already to a degree doing
Yeah.
that? So one answer to that is, the approach to the singularity, perhaps it'll be very seamless because we've already started augmenting ourselves the minute the first person used, a cane or a pair of glasses or a telescope. Those are already transhumanist things.
I mean,
Anyways.
you guys have seen the Google Assistant that could call on your behalf, right?
Wow, no, I've not.
Yeah, if you are listening to this, just Google it. But it's essentially what it does is it could call a restaurant for you and make reservations and do things like that on your behalf. And it's the technology that just like said that it existed a few weeks ago.
Wow, that's
Interesting.
wild. I saw on my Facebook feed actually one example of an error in artificial intelligence, specifically as it relates to autonomous vehicles. I don't know if you guys all saw this one, but it was an autonomous vehicle that was looking at a bus in front of it, and the bus had an advertisement that just had a bunch of bicyclists who are bicycling, and it identified the bus as bicyclists because they happen to be the right size. So so
interesting.
I don't know. It's just an example how it always seems to be, we're always approximating human behavior, but
Yeah, so I think that there's nothing scarier than humans. Now, there's of course the much less pleasant parts of war, even as unpleasant as these have been, such as Sean Gorley's research on the number of people dead in an attack versus the frequency of that type of attack with that number of people dead. And it turns out that when you plot them on a log linear graph, you get a straight line, meaning that it's an exponential graph. Now, an exponential graph is like, let's say you did 2 times 1/2, you get 1 times 1/2, which half times a half is a quarter. You would get a line that looked like it really sharp at the beginning, but then approaches 0.
interesting. So I think that with that graph, there's a measure of predictability, right?
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it is that Sean Gorley found that in conflicts that don't have an end, the slope of this line is negative 2.5, and in stuff that does end, it's farther away. And the war that he analyzed specifically in regards to this was the Iraq War, and he found that it had been, at the time of his research, 2.5 for years.
Interesting. Now, I think I watched a TED Talk with this guy, and he's a physicist, and I think he also analyzed not just the Iraq War but several other wars. Just to make sure.
And that's how he got the data of how it couldn't be if it wasn't 2.5.
Yeah. So how would you put in layman's terms essentially his findings?
That the number of times an attack will happen with a certain number of people dead is predictable.
Okay, interesting.
In a conflict.
And then the mitigating factors, as you said, were if it's an endless war or there doesn't have a clear end versus one with an end. And then what was the prediction? It increases with time, or
No, it's that if it's at 2.5, then it won't have a clear end until it dips below or goes above.
okay.
But if it doesn't, then it'll just continue
Interesting.
indefinitely.
So that could provide a tool for policy makers, at least in terms of some metric for how a conflict is going. Then,
Not just how it's going, but how to maybe end it sooner.
interesting. Wow, wow. So again, this is an example of people using mathematics to make sense of things and hopefully have a resolution to it.
And before, of course, and the one thing I just wanted to talk about is that mathematics can be used and are used a lot in war, but sometimes the way that they are can be short-sighted. Like in World War II, I guess they had to minimize. Oh, they didn't have to, but I mean they tried to maximize civilian casualties in certain places. Because all the stuff was done in civilian places, all the factories, everything like that was in just normal towns and cities. And so carpet bombing raids were analyzed mathematically by statisticians to have the most number of dead in the most disabled factories with a raid. And it's one of the most grim uses of mathematics, aside from maybe the atomic bomb and stuff with John von Neumann that I know about.
And, ultimately, with technology advancing to the point where we now have precision-guided munitions, you can still prosecute those same targets with much less collateral damage. And so there are all sorts of interesting conversations that can be had about the advantages of technology. So, making more lethal and precise weaponry, by definition, means that, you're able to do far more destruction. But in theory, it also allows you to do it in a much more surgical way so as to limit collateral damage.
And of course, another aspect of that is the cost of the war, because I know that barrel bombs are used in places where they can't afford other bombs, and they're just the worst.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Barrel bombs just being a barrel filled with munitions and shreds of stuff and dropped on I think in Iraq they were dropped on was it Iraq?
They use them a lot in Syria.
In Syria they use all the time.
And are those, with respect to international protocol, what's the stance on barrel bombs?
The way that they're using them, it's illegal.
Yeah, as I understand it, it's illegal. Yeah.
Okay. So we're talking about
the Syrian government.
Okay.
Yeah, dropping barrel bombs on the resistance.
And I think certain times in civilian populations.
Consistently, dropping it on civilians.
War is what happens when things break down in communication, and the way that we conduct that violence has to be assessed both ethically and empirically. It is important that we keep this in mind when we celebrate national holidays and sound the call to war. I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Gabriel.
And this has been Breaking Math. On with this, we had today...
Hey, Carlo.
And Carlo, anything you want to plug?
No, just enjoyed having the opportunity to chat with you guys. It was interesting.
Awesome. Yeah, we very much enjoyed having you. We really enjoy having someone like yourself who has a passion for military history and other folks who we can learn from.